Welcome to Books and Brunch with BYTA. Want to thank everyone for registering for this online event and for choosing to spend an hour of your Sunday with us. Please take a moment and let us know where you are logged in from. If you could just put that in the chat, we'd appreciate it. See where you are. I'll tell you a little bit more about Books and Brunch with BYTA. These are online discussions produced and hosted by BYTA members who volunteer to bring yoga teachers, wellness practitioners, and spiritual leaders onto the BYTA Zoom platform to share about themselves and their work. They are supported, Books and Brunch with BYTA events, that is, are supported by our BYTA administrative team, Lorenzo Wilkins, our Creative Services Director, and Galanda Brooker, who serves as producer and technical advisor. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Galanda to share a few guidelines about how we plan to run today's event. Galanda?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Books and Brunch with BYTA. We ask that you please keep your microphone on mute throughout unless the panelists ask for you to unmute. Feel free to enter any questions in the chat. Even if it's early, we're making note and we'll feed them to the presenters as well. So just sit back, enjoy.
Thank you. I met today's host, Pamela Stokes Eggleston, on the parking lot of the Maryland University of Integrative Health about 7 or 8 years ago. And I approached her, introduced myself, and told her about this idea that was germinating to start an organization to support and represent Black yoga teachers. We exchanged emails and we have remained connected ever since. When BYTA was incorporated as a nonprofit, she was among the first group of yoga teachers to join. She presented at the BYTA 2017 conference and has remained an active member of BYTA. Pamela Stokes Eggleston she's a heavyweight in our community. She's the founder and director of Yoga to Sleep, co-founder of Retreat to Spirit, and faculty at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. She is a certified yoga therapist, meditation teacher, and end-of-life grief doula with specialized training in plant-based nutrition, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and trauma-informed yoga to work with service members, veterans, their caregivers, and insomnia sufferers. Previously serving as co-executive director of the Yoga Service Collective, she cultivated financial resilience and strategic partnerships for the organization. An avid yogini for over 20 years, Pamela was motivated to begin her teaching journey when she realized that yoga decreased her insomnia and reduced her osteoarthritis pain. Pamela has a Master of Science in Yoga Therapy from MIH and a Master of Business Administration from University of Maryland Global Campus, and served as president of the UMGC Alumni Association. In addition, she is a contributing editor of Best Practices for Yoga with Veterans and Yoga and Resilience, Empowering Practices for Survivors of Sexual Trauma, as well as researcher and author of Yoga Therapy as a complementary modality for female veteran caregivers with traumatic stress, a case study, and addressing multiple sclerosis, symptoms of, let me back up, addressing multiple sclerosis symptoms, a yoga therapy case study. Pamela serves on the advisory board of Yoga Unify, the grant advisory committee of the Yoga Alliance Foundation, as a collaborative response to the impact of COVID-19 within the yoga community and the editorial board of the Journal of Applied Yoga Studies. An accomplished consultant, advisor, researcher, published author, and international speaker, Pamela has worked for numerous agencies, including Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Labor as a yoga therapy intern for Johns Hopkins Medical Center, and as an advisor on Congress-supported publications centering on substance abuse, mental health, criminal justice, and military and veteran family matters. Pamela is a writer and a poet. Her work and writing have been featured with Yoga Therapy Today, Insight Timer, Meditation Studio, Gaiam, MilitaryFamilyLife.com, Military Spouse Magazine, Yoga Journal, Mantra Yoga and Health, Essence, The Huffington Post, and she's been on Ellen and MSNBC. Please join me in welcoming today's Books and Brunch with BYTA producer and host, Pamela Stokes Eggleston. Pamela Stokes Eggleston, gotta say the name right, who will introduce our special guest today. Welcome, Pamela, and thank you for all that you've done to make this event happen.
Thank you so much, Jana. I almost didn't believe you that you were going to read my entire bio. I was like, which one did I send? And I'm just like, oh, that one. Thank you so much. I'm truly humbled to be here. It's been several months planning, and I'm just so excited to dive right in. So thanks to Jana Long, thanks to the BYTA membership and the BYTA administrative team and the BYTA board of directors. Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. This is a gift. I want to jump right in and introduce the illustrious Tracee Stanley. I am so excited to have her here, and I'm just really ready to jump right into some of the questions that I have as it relates to your book and things like that. But I'm going to read your bio, and then you can add whatever you like. So, because we just have to read Tracee Stanley's bio. Tracee Stanley is the best-selling author of Radiant Rest and Empowered Life Self-Inquiry Oracle, a spiritual teacher for over 2 decades. Tracee weaves a sacred alchemy of yoga nidra, self-inquiry, meditation, ancestor reverence, tantra, and devotion to create spaciousness for clarity, inner wisdom, and the innate luminosity that is the source of our true power. Tracee is currently writing her second book for Shambhala Publications, which will be released in this year, 2023. This year. But today we're going to talk about Radiant Rest, Yoga Nidra for deep relaxation and awakened clarity. So Tracee, is there anything else you would like to add to your illustrious bio?
No, I think the only thing that I can add is that I am a forever student, and the learning is never complete. And it's a joy to learn and to share what I learn and to share the tools that have helped me.
Oh, yes, yes. Me too, me too. Forever the student, always learning, always learning. I want to talk about this idea that came up in the IG live that we did. And as we did the IG live, which thank you, Jana, for that idea. And because it kind of leads into the current discussion that we're going to have today. We started talking about the goddess in your book as it relates to how you came to the book. So I'm going to put a pin in that. And I want to first ask you what inspired you to write the book, Radiant Rest, Yoga Nidra?
That's a really good question. So I was actually writing the book that is going to be coming out in October. I had started the book proposal and I had been sending the book proposal out, and I was getting feedback about the book proposal. And a friend, and I didn't know anything about publishers or who I should go to for publishers really. And a friend of mine gave me a list of publishers that she thought would be interesting. And from that list, I picked like 5 of who I would really love to be published by. And the next day after I wrote that list, I got an email from Shambhala. And Shambhala was emailing, asking if I would like to write a book on Yoga Nidra, if I was interested in writing a book on Yoga Nidra. And I was like, well, this person is writing a book on Yoga Nidra, and this person has already written a book, and this person has written a book, and there's all these books on Yoga Nidra. I'm not going to write a book on Yoga Nidra. And so I want to just identify that at that moment, I was feeling like I had nothing unique to offer. I was feeling like, oh, this has already been done. So I just want to say to anybody who's feeling like this has already been done, it's not been done by you, right? And what wound up happening was that weekend, the editor at Shambhala was very persistent. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of let myself relax a little bit with this and look for the sign. If there's a sign, then I'll follow through with the sign. And that weekend I had taught a workshop, and probably 6 or 7 people came up to me after the workshop and asked me if I had a book on Yoga Nidra. And that had never happened before. And so they said, a few of them were like, I've never heard anybody talk about Yoga Nidra in the way that you're speaking about it. So I took my step back and said, okay, let me think about what is my relationship with Yoga Nidra? How did I cultivate this relationship? What were the tools that I used to cultivate that relationship? And then how can I share those tools? And that's how the book came about.
Wow. That's incredible. So sometimes we go up against our edges, and then the universe pretty much says, here's this opportunity, and just opens the door for these opportunities. So thank you so much for sharing. Going back to the pen and the goddess poem, which is on page 15 of your book, first of all, explain kind of the narrative around the goddess and why it was important to include. And then I wonder if you could read that poem.
Yes, I would love to.
Yes, in the book, because it's just so beautiful. But the idea and the inspiration, and then perhaps read after. Yeah.
So I had been practicing Yoga Nidra for at least a decade before I actually learned that there was a goddess called Yoga Nidra. I had actually been chanting the Devi Suktam, which is like 108 names of the goddess, different aspects of the goddess. And you can think of the goddess as this anthropomorphic figure, or you can think about the goddess as this nurturing quality, right? This nurturing, holding, kind of moon-like quality that is holding and has all these different aspects of personality, right? So it's not necessarily some sort of idol. It's something that we all have within us. It's an aspect that we all have within us, the aspect of the mother, right? And I was doing a workshop with Sri Devi Bringing, and she started talking about the goddess Yoga Nidra. And I was like, what? Wait 1 second. How come nobody has ever talked about this to me before? And, what I realized was that sometimes when we learn from male teachers, there's aspects of information that is not seen as important. And so, of course, when I heard about this Yoga Nidra, I started going down the rabbit hole of learning everything that I could about Yoga Nidra and hearing really the story that's part of the Mahabharata, where Vishnu is in this deep dreamless sleep and on this cosmic ocean. And he's in this space between 2 kind of parts of time. So it's called a kalpa. It's like this place between creation and recreation. And for us humans, it would be like, a drop of a dot. It's like a blink of an eye, like the space between the inhale and the exhale. But for someone like Vishnu, who's the preserver and the sustainer, it's like 5,000 years. And so while he's sleeping, there's this lotus that grows out of his stomach. And on this lotus is Brahma, who's meditating. And because Vishnu's been in this sleep for so long, this Ama starts coming out from his ears. And it's these two little demons that come out. And the demons, some of the stories say that the demons' names are too much and not enough. And they start attacking Brahma. And Brahma is like, oh, the universe is actually in jeopardy. Vishnu needs to wake up. And what he realizes is that Yoga Nidra has taken her seat inside of Vishnu. And he has to sing to Yoga Nidra to beg her to come to wake up Vishnu. And so it's a much longer story, but one of the morals of the story is that even the gods are powerless without the Shakti of sleep, without the Shakti of repose. And I felt like once I started to understand this quality of the goddess, it reminded me of my Nana. It reminded me of how she used to hold me in her arms. It reminded me of Amma, the hugging saint. You know, it reminded me of all these beautiful women in in my lineage and other lineages. And it also reminded me of nature, how we're held by nature. And so that was really, to me, something that I felt needed to be in the book, because I wanted people to have access to that part of themselves that is nurturing, as well as all of what is surrounding them that is holding them unconditionally, like the Mother Earth.
I'm taking that in. And I wonder now if you could read your poem, The Goddess, for us.
Yes, the goddess. She is the great mother, the one who holds, nurtures, and supports unconditionally. Her body is the fertile soil of the earth, her spine a flowing river, her heart filled with a sea of liquid diamonds, her eyes deep pools into an endless void. Her breath is rose-colored light filling you with love, her face radiant like the full moon. She is waiting for you to surrender into her arms so you might sleep while awake, like the divine child whose birthright is deep rest, peace, and truth.
Thank you for that gift.
Thank you for asking
Yes,
me to share it.
beautiful. That's a beautiful poem. I want to talk about the book as it relates to the three parts that you have. The depths and mystery of Yoga Nidra, welcoming Yoga Nidra, and then you have the practices. And for those of you that don't have the book, Tracee's book can be found at your local independent bookstore. I remember you said that.
Yeah.
And if you have to go to, you know, the other place that shall remain nameless, you can do that as well. Because her books are everywhere. But when you purchase the book, you can download these practices and actually hear Tracee's lovely voice as she takes you through 6 practices. And I've done that myself, and it's a lovely thing to talk about and afterwards and reflect upon, which brings me to my next question. Why is the study of the self, the curiosity of the self, critical in the development of intuition and purpose in the practice of Yoga Nidra itself?
Yeah, you know, dominant culture has separated us from the wisdom of our inner knowing. It's caused us to second guess ourselves. It's caused us to outsource our creativity and our knowing. And so, you know, Yoga Nidra connects us to this place within us that is always well, that is always rested, that is eternal. And for me, that was the key for the book, is to really highlight that this is what is accessible through the practice of Yoga Nidra. Because a lot of times when we speak about Yoga Nidra, we're talking about, mostly in the West, we're speaking about a technique, right? We're talking about the technique of, okay, I'm going to lay down and someone's going to guide me through, and I'm probably going to fall asleep. And when I wake up, I'll be rested. And that's perfectly fine. But the other yoga nidras that we should be talking about are one that we already spoke about, the goddess, and then yoga nidra, which is the state of consciousness. And the state of consciousness is said to be similar, if not the same, to samadhi, which is the final goal of yoga, which we could also say is moksha, is freedom. So when we think about this, yoga nidra is actually a full system of yoga. It encompasses all of the 8 limbs of yoga. So it is a practice that encompasses all 8 limbs of yoga. It's yoga itself that is presided over by the goddess yoga nidra, who is the one who is holding and nurturing and keeping you safe. And she is the one that holds that space to lead you to the state that is yoga nidra, that helps you to remember your wholeness and who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I think that part of our ailment, let's just say, in society is that we don't remember who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And when others remember who they are, it becomes dangerous to other people. And they feel like they have to really oppress other people. There's something in this dominant culture that knows that it can't hold on to us. It can't control us anymore if we know who we really are, if we remember our ancestors, if we remember our connection to nature. So for me, this is literally like dismantling that within us so that it can kind of ripple out into the world. I hope that isn't too long of an answer for your question.
No, that's beautiful. I feel like that we're up against those edges. We're looking over the cliff of, and we're bumping up against these societal restrictions, I'll say, that are doing a lot of prohibiting, pushing. And that's the energy, as opposed to, and once people wake up, once people allow for themselves to flourish as it relates to self-inquiry. And that's an important piece in your book. So I wanted to definitely kind of jump off with why self-inquiry, svadhyaya and tapas and all of those things are really important as it relates to the work that you're referring to in your book, surrounding yoga nidra. So that wasn't a long answer. That was a perfect answer. I want to piggyback on that to talk about, because you started talking about samadhi, you talked about moksha, and you mentioned this consciousness. And in the book, you talk about from the Mandukya Upanishad, which I've been in heavily just because I do stuff around sleep, and these kind of 4 states of mind. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about that and why that's important for anyone doing this work.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question, because the Mandukya Upanishads is actually the shortest Upanishad.
Mm-hmm.
And what it covers is the states of consciousness. So the states of consciousness would be waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and what is called the 4th, or turiya, which is similar, if not the same, to the state of yoga nidra, right? And if we go a little bit deeper into this, kind of inquiry into these states of consciousness, they're also represented in the sound of Om, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the syllable of Om, they're represented in the sound of Om. They're represented in the body as well. Is that the waking state is said to be, the portal to the waking state is the 3rd eye. The portal to the dream state is said to be the throat. And the portal to the deep sleep state is the heart center of the chest, deep behind the sternum. And then deeper inward, moving in towards the cave of the heart, is that place of turiya, right? So when we think about this practice of yoga nidra, like the technique, we're being guided in some ways through a journey that leads us through these states of consciousness. And while we're moving through those states of consciousness, we're also let's say, moving through different brainwave states at the same time that are very similar to those states of consciousness. So it's important to understand first, I think, that it's not a linear journey, right? Sometimes you could lay down and find yourself out in 2 seconds. Has anybody ever laid down for a yoga nidra, and then all of a sudden you hear, wiggle your toes, it's time to come back. And you're like, where did I go? Right? It's like, you went somewhere. You weren't aware of it when you were there, but you know that you went somewhere, because the fragrance of that beauty of wherever you went, whether it was the state of yoga nidra or just a deep dreamless sleep, it comes back with you. And it's a remembrance that, for me, I feel like pulls you back to come back to the practice and to continue to explore more.
It's the remembering, right? It's
Yes.
that in that space. I wonder, I have a bunch of questions here because I was just, first of all, I love this book. This is why I'm doing this, because it's an amazing book. And I believe in, you know, just supporting people who really have a deeper, more nuanced sense of the current topics that we may have studied from other people, and also to add on to that, because like we said at the beginning, we're all students. I mean, we're always a student, right?
Yeah.
I wonder this is a two-part question. I know how Yoga Nidra has been applied to working with, I'll say, the challenged population. So I'll just use myself as an example. Veteran service members and their families, their caregivers, and also as it relates to race-based trauma. And I want to say hi to Dr. Gail. I haven't seen her in such a long time, and she has an amazing book about race-based stress and trauma. But how can Yoga Nidra, because I have been in lots of trauma trainings around veterans and these, I'll say, challenged populations, and the narrative has been, and we talked about this briefly in the IG, okay, just let them fall asleep, right? Because their nervous system has been wrecked and they need to get rest in whatever way that is. And even though rest and sleep aren't the same, you know, let them fall asleep. And I know that when I have taught Yoga Nidra to these populations, there's a cacophony of snoring. They're exhausted because often they're chest breathers as well. And so I'm wondering if you could touch on that part and then talk about how it could relate to race-based stress and trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as allowing people to fall asleep, I can just talk about the exhaustion and despair that's happening right now. So recently I was teaching, I went back to teaching live for the first time last year. And I was teaching, and I had my whole plan of, okay, I'm going to be teaching Yoga Nidra, and I'll teach people about Yoga Nidra. And when we got into the space, there were about 50 people there. And I was like, oh, wait a second. Everybody here, for the most part, is absolutely bone tired, exhausted, sad. There's grief. There's unacknowledged and unprocessed things happening. I'm not teaching anything here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to provide space for people to sleep. That's it. That's it. So I do agree that there's a time when we have to, as facilitators, we have to have a responsive strategy to teaching. Is that I was not about to just power through with teaching Yoga Nidra and trying to have people be awake and aware when really we needed to rest. And I think that with any kind of trauma, including trauma that veterans might have, trauma that's race-based trauma, is, first of all, there's two things. One is that we need to be in a sacred abode. We need to understand what it is, whether it's an imaginary place, whether it's a real place. In the book, I offer these circles of protection. That is something that I was given in a different kind of form by a teacher 27 or 8 years ago, and then received again with another teacher. And I kind of blended those two together as a way to create these energetic circles of protection, which during the pandemic, and not to say we're not out of the pandemic, but during the lockdown and the intensity of the pandemic, that was one of the things that people said really helped them the most.
Mhm.
You know, after George Floyd was murdered, this is what people told me. This helped me the most, being able to protect myself, not only while I was practicing Yoga Nidra, but to take this out with me in the world. So a sacred abode that allows us to soften and to notice where we have resistance, and to acknowledge that resistance is okay. Because there's a lot of times where you go into a class and someone will say, oh, just relax, let go,
Right.
as though it's like the easiest thing to do, right? No, it's not true. So finding that sacred abode within, and then also being able to be in and create spaces for ourselves, and as facilitators to be able to create spaces that allow for every possibility. And that you can say to yourself, you can say, you know, to the class, all are welcome. You know, be prepared as a teacher. I do think that being a yoga teacher, quote unquote, requires a lot more education to keep people safe than it might have done 25 years ago. Because when I first started practicing yoga almost 30 years ago, nobody was even thinking about this, right? So we really have to create the space that allows everyone to be welcome for, and that means that you have to have tools.
Right.
As a teacher, you have to have tools. You can't just do a one-day trauma-informed workshop and think that it's all, you're ready to go. That's not how it works.
Oh, thank you for that. And I agree. And that's where the forever being the forever student comes into play, and also embodying the things that you're practicing. So for me, it's, you know, and I feel the same way when I hear your words in your yoga nidra and your meditations, that there's an embodiment there. You know, there's a practice. You're focusing in on your, you know, your own healing, as well as this idea of creating the sacred abode, which is a nice way and a much better way of saying, and I hope that this term this is only my opinion, not the opinion of BYTA or its members.
Yeah.
But a safe space. If you know, I thought we left that pre-pandemic. You know, this is a safe space. I mean, because you can't guarantee that. Right, 100%. You can strive for that, but even the aspiration of a safe space, as opposed to I like to say brave spaces. We've, you know, a lot of people have taken on this kind of brave space language, but also like this sacred abode. In your book, you talk about creating, which I love everything in this book. Biased with just nest, focus on this idea of a nest. And setting up your nest before you even get started with, you know, well, that is part of the practice, but before you even kind of exhale into the space, is creating this sacred abode in this nest. So can you kind of tie the nest?
Yes, I'll tie the nest. So the first time I heard the term rest nest was from one of my teachers, Uma Dinsmore Thule. And then I have another friend and co-collaborator. Her name is Chanti Tacarante Perez. And she went down this rabbit hole of looking at different birds and how they create their nests, and how a bird will take any and everything it can in order to create the most protective nest for their young, right? And then I was in Atlanta and I was teaching, and I had the students setting up a nest for themselves, and I was watching them set the nest up. And I was watching, there was like a lot of skimping going on. There was a lot of like, you know, I'm not really comfortable. And so the next day I was like, okay, now you're going to set up a nest for someone else. They got all the pillows. They got every single, are you comfortable? Oh, let me get one more thing. Let me put one more thing in. And so then I just shifted my language around the setup in live classes. I would ask teachers and people who are practicing Yoga Nidra, set up the nest like you are setting it up for your most beloved. Because then you are setting it up with so much care. You're setting it up with that energy of the nurturing goddess, right? that is going to do everything she can to make sure you are supported in every nook and cranny.
Love it.
And then at the same time, though, when you're setting up for the most beloved, you're realizing the resistance that you have to self-devotion.
Mm-hmm.
You are realizing the resistance you have to your own worthiness, your own birthright to rest. And then we get to take that and we go with our self-inquiry, which is why self-inquiry is important. We get to use that self-inquiry to dig in. And once we start to see these reasons why, we can start to make different choices. And this is where the tapas comes in. So tapas translates to heat, and we can think about it as being the friction of going against the grain from what you would normally do. If we think about that in neuroscience terms, we're creating different neural pathways, right? That neural pathway shift requires you to have a pause, right? So we can think about Octavia Rahim's book, Pause, Rest, Be, right? You pause, and then you say, oh, let me be present in this pause, and let me turn my face over here and realize that I have a different choice rather than going down the same road I always go down, which is to skimp and to feel like I'm not worth really resting. I'm going through the motions.
And I think that's beautiful. And I think the self-devotion, the self-inquiry does not mean self-deprivation. So often when you're inquiring and you're being curious about yourself, it's not you're beating up on yourself, but more of a discovery of yourself. I believe. So thank you for sharing that. Jenna has this great question in the chat that I want to get to.
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, I just want to get to it. Was there any extra study or coaching on your part to develop your voice guide Yoga Nidra? Because it's a good question, because
no, I wish maybe I should take some coaching. I don't know. No, this is my voice.
It's lovely. It's a lovely.
Thank you, though. I appreciate that question.
So we had, I think at the beginning of the chat, people were admiring your beautiful amethyst, which is my birthstone in the back. And I don't know if that's part of an altar you have, a sacred shrine, but I want to know, what are your favorite things on that would be on a Yoga Nidra altar? That's one of the things that you talk about in your book, is a creation of a Yoga Nidra altar.
Yeah. So my ancestors, my Nana she was a reverend preacher. Her parents before her were preachers. So she's always with me. You know, she's always with me. I started feeling her presence really powerfully once I started teaching yoga, which was about 10 years after she passed away, or so, maybe 15. So my ancestors, I have sacred objects that I have foraged from the land that I live on, which is a way for me to kind of honor the ancestors of the land that I'm on right now, which is the Tewa people in northern New Mexico. The amethysts for me are kind of like a little bit of a protective nest. So for me, when I'm teaching, I wish I could show you, but I feel like the nest is here with me also. Just because I'm teaching doesn't mean that I don't have the nest. So I have something to keep me covered, that's a little bit heavy to keep me grounded. I'm sitting on something really comfy. You can't really see it, but something really comfy, right? And everything is around me. I have my harmonium here. I have some sacred rocks here that are behind that other amethyst. And up there, you can't really see. I don't know if you can see, and I don't think I can move that. But there's other pictures and sacred items. There's items that have been given to me from people. And I have altars all over the house. So my writing desk has Saraswati, right? My nest where I'm resting, it has my ancestors right there. There's a dream altar there. So if you come into my house, you'll see journals and altars everywhere.
I love it. I have altars everywhere as well. I mean, it's a nice to connect to your ancestors for wherever you go in your house, and really you want that energy in. You want to bring that energy. And I love how you said you need things to ground. I'm looking at my desk now. I'm like, yeah, I have crystals on, but you guys can't see on the back end. So that's beautiful. How let's stay on the ancestors discussion a bit. How can we use the practices and the tools that you lay out in Radiant Rest to connect more with our ancestors? And that could be of the land, that could be of our lineage.
Well, I would say a couple of things is one, when you're creating the circles of protection, I give in the book some suggestions. And then as I was teaching those circles of protection from the time the book came out until now, those circles have kind of evolved in a way where I want people to create their own circles, right? To know what their own circles should be. But the circles of our well ancestors as a circle of protection, where we kind of visualize that our ancestors who are well in spirit have gathered around this circle as a form of protection for us, is very helpful. I've heard so many incredible stories from people just about who showed up for them, what messages they received from people who showed up in their ancestor circle. And the healing that they received that has nothing to do with me. It's just them asking for that space to be protected for them. I also give a little bit of instruction about how to create an ancestor altar. And there's many different ways to do that. What I'm offering really is more of a guideline, so that, because sometimes we feel like we need permission to do something. And then once we have the permission, then it's like, oh, okay, wait, I'm going to be creative and do this and do that. So this is just like a portal into creating your own ancestor portal. And in the new book that's coming out in October, there'll be more information about ancestor altar and practices that you can do on the new moon specifically for your ancestors.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm so grateful for that, because I think many people feel like they need permission, or they don't know how to go about it. And often there's no connection with, okay, how to do it. There's just, Google. And even though Google has its place, and there's, lots of, I think, signals and noise and good information all at once jumbled up coming in as it relates to that, and how we can connect to that. So that was beautifully stated. I have a last question, and then I really want to hear from everyone, because I feel like we have Tracee here to share some points from her book and her practices. If there's a question that you guys would like to ask, please put it in the chat and I will get to it. But I want to talk about this focus on the last 4 limbs. So we know the 8 limbs, and you talk about Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and how those, all 4 of those are the more subtle limbs. And you wrap that into kind of your discussion on Turiya. Can you talk about that more and how you related that in the book?
Yeah. So what I would say is, firstly, hopefully we're all practicing the yamas and the niyamas. And if we're not, let's go back and remember and forget about all the other things. And then we're moving into pranayama, right? Which is one of the first things that we do in Yoga Nidra, is that we start to become aware of the breath, right? That's some kind of breath awareness. And then Pratyahara is the withdrawal of the senses. But I like one of the definitions from Swami Veda, which is withdrawal of the senses so that you can re-assimilate into your true self.
I love that.
And it's beautiful. And at the same time, Pratyahara is the bridge from the external practices of yoga to the internal practices of yoga. So once we start to move through that bridge of, okay, I'm withdrawing my awareness of sound, of touch, of smell, of taste, then you start moving into this place of concentration, which is usually the technique of Yoga Nidra, where we're doing some kind of body rotation, some awareness of the body rotation. So we're bringing concentration to these different parts of the body. from there, there's usually some sort of spaciousness in Yoga Nidra, and hopefully when you're being guided, there's spaciousness to allow for whatever is going to happen. I don't believe personally that the state of meditation is anything that we can make happen. It's kind of like, in my experience early in meditation, felt like, oh, it's an elevator drop, almost where you kind of drop into this place spontaneously, right?
Mhm.
And so that hopefully we have the spaciousness to fall into this place of meditation. And then I really believe that the state of Yoga Nidra, Turiya, Samadhi is something that arises by grace.
Mm-hmm.
So as a facilitator, all we are doing is we are creating the space for that grace to arrive. As a practitioner, all we're doing is we're continually going back to the altar of ourselves with this self-devotion, allowing ourselves to be held by the goddess and opening ourselves up to grace. And you said something earlier where you kind of broke down the word remember. You said it was like a remembering. And what's really interesting is that part of Yoga Nidra comes from one of these sacred texts called the Maha Nirvana Tantra. And it's talked about as this way of consecrating the body as a divine vessel, and also recollecting ourselves. So we could also say remembering ourselves, putting ourselves back together, that every time we go into Yoga Nidra, it's like a ritual where we release what isn't true and we reclaim what is true. And then we bring that back and we come back into our remembered wholeness, right? And then we can breathe from that place. We can let go of breathing from the personality. We breathe from that place. We start to move from that place and act from that place. And if we continue with a consistent practice, pretty soon the shift starts to occur, right? So I love that you said remembering. I didn't want to forget that.
Oh, yes, I believe that. And thank you for tying that together. I love how you said the altar of ourselves and really consecrating our body as a divine vessel and to remember that we're divine. So thank you for sharing. We have a question from earlier. Deja Love Hardinet asked, has Tracee read the book Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey?
I've listened to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've read it. If so, how has Tricia's perspective on rest as a counter to capitalism and racism informed Tracee's own rest practice as a complement to Radiant Rest, which shares the intersectionality of yoga, healing, and Black women, or Black women?
Beautiful. So what I would say is, I believe that the practices of yoga are practices of decolonization. I believe that Patanjali, who's known as the first psychologist, understood this kind of colonization that was happening and the dismantling that needed to happen in the mind in order to be able to move beyond oppression. And so what I hear is the similarities of what Tricia is sharing, what I'm sharing, what Octavia Rahim is sharing, what Gail Parker is sharing. There's many people sharing the same message. And I feel like we're all sharing it through our own unique wisdom and our own embodied wisdom. And I think that it's important for us to reclaim our birthright. And that's why it's not a mistake that all of these books and all of these things have started coming forward, whether or not people have been teaching for 20 years or 10 years or however long. It seems like there was like a fulcrum coming and still coming and will hopefully continue to come of information and different ways that will resonate with different people. And I appreciate Tricia's work, and I actually interviewed her on my podcast, as I did Dr. Gail Parker. And what she shares in the podcast is amazing.
I love that answer. It's that book is incredible. So thank you for that question. And yeah, so I wonder if you can, and we talked about this a little bit before, talk about the difference between sleep and rest. there are, it's like a Venn diagram, I'm a, so you could have, it could be like this, but then there's definite differences in both of those. So, and you talk about it a little in your work. So could you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a sleep expert. So what I would say is that sleep is a biological need. That's what we talked about on the IG Live. It's a biological need. If you don't sleep for several days, several weeks, you're not going to be alive, right? But we have accustomed ourselves since the invention of the light bulb to let go of our rest, right? Because we've lost our connection since the invention of the light bulb and the industrial age came. We lost our connection with nature. We lost our connection with the natural cycles of nature that say when the sun is going down, it's time for you to slow down and rest and not sleep with the iPhone underneath your pillow or stay up binging until midnight when you have to wake up at 5. So, we can go decades without resting. I mean, I remember when I was working in corporate America, I was the president of a company and I didn't take a vacation for like 7 years. Because I was, there's all these other things that happen, which is like, oh, I'm afraid if I have this illusion, my ego is telling me that they can't do it without me. And if I actually leave and they do it without me, what's going to happen to my ego, right? So it's not uncommon. How many of us have never seen our parents take a nap, right? It's not uncommon. So rest is not something that's optional, which is what, dominant culture would love us to believe, is that not only is it optional, but it's lazy. And that if you rest, you're going to miss out on something, right? And sleep is something that you really can't do without. You will become ill. You will become seriously ill quicker with no sleep than you will with no rest. But I think the end results are going to be the same eventually. That's not scientific, but yes.
Well, I love it. And I'm reading Leslie's grandma would say every closed eye is not shut. And one of the stories that Tracee does talk about as it relates to rest is, and I remember my grandmother and my mother, I'm resting my eyes. I'm like, we can all relate to having, our nanas and moms just doing that. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's, I call that kind of tiny bits of joy, like parts of that is what we need, to restore, and not for the cog in the wheel, but for our own internal altars as it relates to our bodies. So Tracee, this has been lovely. We have about 2 minutes left. So I was wondering if there's one last tidbit you'd like to kind of briefly mention as it relates to your book and what you hope people get out of your book.
I really hope that people receive the message that they are worthy and that they leave with some tools that are simple, because the way that I wrote the book really is for you to be able to self-guide. It's for you to listen to the practices and get to know the practices enough that you can start to self-guide yourself through these practices. So you can be doing them at any point. You can shorten them to 5 minutes and just, focus on the breathing. And really, the Householder's Flow chapter, which is about how to weave the practices through your daily life when you don't have time because you have responsibilities and the illusion of no time, is, time, a relationship to time and space changes when we are in relationship with Yoga Nidra. And so if you want more spaciousness in life, start to practice Yoga Nidra, start to practice rest, and everything else I think will start to shift in your life. So thank you so much, Pamela.
Thank you. Yes, start this practice, even if it's like Tracee said, 5 minutes. I've done work with caregivers where I'm like 3 minutes. Just get it, just start where you can start. Just begin, right?
Yeah.
Not just begin and weave it in to your day. I think it's a beautiful practice. So thank you so much, Tracee. This has been just a lovely, lovely blessing. The next Books and Brunch will be on June 6th. So save the date, everyone. But this is Radiant Rest by Tracee Stanley. Get the book at your
Thank
local
you.
independent bookstore and the other places that shall not be named today. Thank you all so much for joining. This has been
Yes,
it
thank
has
you.
gone very quickly, as I knew it would. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate you, whether you're here live or watching it later. And thank you, Pamela, for such beautiful, thoughtful questions. I really appreciate you.
So welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to BYTA.
Thank you, BYTA.